I'm live. Today, welcome. And that light behind is not going to work, is it? So I'm going to have to pull the blind down. And that's better. Welcome to this live session, talking about weaknesses, problems, drawing architecture. Now, what I did was I got a whole lot of my drawing students' works and I had a good look at them, as well as accounts on Instagram and other things that I've looked at in working out my videos, and thought, what are the most common mistakes that I see in architecture drawings? Architecture is a great subject and it has a lot of joys, but it does have a lot of challenges as well. It does have a lot of problems, well, not problems, but challenges in drawing it, which mean that weaknesses tend to reoccur in the same sorts of areas. So I thought, what are the things I see most consistently over and over and over again in people who've never met each other, who've never seen each other's drawings, but whose drawings do reflect the same problems? Because I think this shows the things that we can actually watch out for, things that we can be alert for, not just when we draw, but when we think about learning, when we think about the things we need to learn to do better. Because these are, by and large, areas, each of these 20 are all areas that we can concentrate on sort of quite specifically, and therefore we can improve on them quite specifically. So we'll start with number one. And look, if you're watching on the chat, please hit the like button if you find this interesting. And secondly, tell me where in the world you are. I'm always interested to see where people join us from. So the first drawing architecture weakness, no great surprises, and that's perspective angles. And I must admit, I am mystified by this for two reasons. One is, if we're drawing from photos or from life, then we just have to look carefully at what we're looking at. We don't need to even know the word perspective. We just need to look carefully at what we're seeing. But if we're drawing from our imagination, then the perspective theory is helpful. And that tells us exactly what we see if we're looking in life. And that's that the perspective angles, the side of the building that's sloping away from us, or both sides that are sloping away from us, that those angles are not parallel as they go up the building, but as they move above eye level, as they move above the level of the camera or us looking, they always increase slightly as they get higher and higher. And that's a simple rule, and it happens every single time in every single instance. And whenever I'm drawing, as I'm doing horizontal lines going up a building that's sloping away from us, then every line has to be just slightly, even if it's ever so slightly. If the lines are close together, it'll be very slight. If they're further apart, it'll be a greater angle. But every line we do has to be at a greater angle. And over again, I just see lines that are parallel, or many of the lines, if it's a tall structure, many of the lines are parallel. Like, that just shouldn't happen. So both understanding the theory and observing really carefully, because if we observe carefully, we'll see that the angles increase. So I'm not sure why perspective angles have to be such a problem, why so many parallel angles, let alone, of course, lines that actually tilt the wrong way. That's sort of carelessness, I think, if I'm honest. A few people just welcome Diane in New Zealand. That's great. Mike Tree Asian, you're in the Netherlands. I've been in Amsterdam, and that was just a wonderful place to visit, and it's a great place for drawing architecture. The Netherlands, Belgium, beautiful buildings there. And now, Jackson, where are you from, Jackson? And Journo or Journo Fay in New Zealand, Kiwi as well. I had some kiwi fruit yesterday. It was so good. Welcome. Okay, so that's the first problem. That's the first. And if anyone on the chat would like to pop in with a comment about what they find most challenging in drawing architecture, then I would love to have that. And if you can share that with us, I'll read that out as well. Just a freaky Hernandez, Latin American, Latino. Hola. Hola, mi amigo. Okay, so that's the first problem we have. Perspective angles that are parallel, that don't increase in angle as they get higher. How are your perspective angles, everyone? Are they good? Are they well behaved? Well, the next one kind of relates, and it's still very much a perspective focus. And this is what I call multiple eye levels. So we look at a drawing, and instead of having an eye level and all the perspective angles, however many there are, there can be lots and lots and lots of vanishing points in any given scene. But in any given scene, all the perspective angles join on a horizontal line, which is the level of the eyes of the person watching or of the camera. But what happens is that if one of the things I often do when I get one of my students' drawings, and so this is a great thing for you to do with your architecture drawings. And if you don't want to wreck your drawing, you can tape it up on a window and put a sheet of paper over it and do this on the sheet of paper over the drawing. I just use a red pen. But you can get all the perspective angles and trace over them. Join them all up. Take them all to their levels and join them all up. And all of these lines should converge with each other on a straight line. And if some converge up here and some down there and some over here and some over here and some don't converge at all, they just go off, then there's a severe eye level problem happening. And eye level is something that you really have to focus on. Now, I do have lots and lots of eye level videos, and I think one of the most helpful one I've got is called it's something like finding eye level in real life. And so it is basically about a dozen or more photos, I think mostly photos that I've drawn, and it's where is eye level here? How do you find out where eye level is? Because if you're not taking the photo, you have to be able to work it out from looking at what you see. Because photos get cropped, and that really changes our ability to say, well, eye level is going to be here or here. So we have to have a way of working this out. So where do I teach? I teach individual students. So if anyone's interested in drawing lessons from me, shoot me an email, and I can give you the details. I do charge for those. I'm sorry. One thing that I do recommend, not recommend, but one thing that I offer is a one-off lesson as a 1 hour critique of your a 1 hour critique of drawings that you've done, where I go through them and I show what I think are the main weaknesses that you have and where and how you might focus most profitably in your future drawing. So that's a 1 hour thing. And again, I do charge for that. All my YouTube videos are free, and I hope they're helpful. Have I considered teaching on school? Look, I actually was once a high school teacher, and I think that's helped me work out my lesson, my videos and my teaching. because part of learning to be a teacher, regardless of the subject, is we learn how we learn, because as teachers we need to be able to teach. Now, I only taught for a few years. It's actually well over 40 years since it's well over 40 years since I taught. I had voice issues. I left teaching to do something else, and when I went to go back to it, I strained my voice really badly, and yeah, anyway, blah blah blah. But so I knew I couldn't be a 5-day a week classroom teacher after that. So I did other things in my life, and that was exciting. But it's nice to bring the circle back to the top, and to be teaching again, and to combine teaching and art. So that's been a lot of fun. And what I've realized, I don't know, has anyone watched the video I posted last night? Has anyone seen my latest video where I talk about, how did I? Let me just look up on the phone. Honestly, I can't remember what I did. That's right. The number one reason your drawing is not improving, and how you can fix it now. And that's all about how the most important part of our drawing is what happens in our head. Look, I'm distracted already. I've only done 2 points. But the main part of the most important part is what I'm saying. The most important part of our drawing happens before we pick up the pen or pencil or whatever we're making our marks with. And yet, so often, particularly for beginners, and I think particularly for self-taught beginners, because if we have a class situation and we have a teacher, then the teacher is responsible, and that's why we're paying them, I guess. The teacher is responsible for kind of giving us information and helping us to understand the big picture. But if we're doing this ourselves, we don't know what we don't know. And the drawings are, in my case, ink on paper. So it's easy to understand that we focus on the ink on the paper. So it's, how do I learn the skills to do that? How do I learn the skills to put the marks on the paper? And so we focus on that. We focus on putting the marks on the paper. So it's all about, what pens do I use? What paper do I use? How can I draw straight lines? How can I draw lines that go where I want them to? All of the things that I call the technical skills. Now they're obviously important, but they're not the most important thing. But they're often the thing that people want to focus on. And from the questions they ask, it becomes clear this is the focus that they have. And yet I reckon 95% of the 95% of what we need to know to draw well happens in our head before we pick up the pen. But it doesn't take 90% of the time of a drawing session, which I think is why it's so deceptive. But it's 90% of what's going to contribute to a successful drawing. So it's all the understanding stuff, it's all the planning stuff, it's all the knowing what to do. Who's ever done all the exercises, done all the drawing practice, and then found a drawing, say a photo to use, really love it, really excited, really want to draw it, pick up the pen, don't actually know where to start, can't work out what line to put where first. Is this you? Anyone listening ever come across this experience? And it's because we haven't done the 90% brain work. We haven't done the thinking. We haven't worked out, what am I wanting to draw? What even is the drawing process? What am I trying to do now? And how am I going to do it? Because when we understand all of this stuff, all this more conceptualized stuff about drawing, This is what, in the end, helps me navigate what am I trying to do in the first place from this photo, and what are the various ways it can be done, because I'm going to choose from them. And all this guides me into, okay, to start my drawing, to get the drawing that in my mind I'm visualizing, because we have to visualize the end if we want to get there. What sort of marks will I have to make, and what will be the best place to start them? And all the things that guide me in my drawing, they all come from understanding the drawing process and being able to apply it to my specific aims and goals for this drawing. How many of you go beyond, and I would like to hear this in the chat, when you draw, how many of you go beyond just trying to do a good copy? Because I think trying to do a copy, accurate copy of the reference, is selling you short in helping to guide your process. I think we need to go beyond just doing a good copy and be wanting to capture something. Now, accuracy is a good thing to capture, don't get me wrong. But I think we want to go beyond that, even just a little beyond that, in what we do. A couple of points here. So school is the new digital learning. Oh, I see. School, SKOOL, is a, okay, it's a brand. Yep, that makes sense. Edgar, welcome, Edgar. I have issues with judging angles. I exaggerate shallow angles and make very sharp angles too shallow. How do I notice when my angles are wrong? Edgar, you check them. After every drawing, you check them. And it looks like you do have angle awareness, which is great. Look, if you've watched any of my perspective videos, you see me often, I'll put the reference on one side, I'll put my drawing next to it, I'll get a strip of paper, I'll hold it on the reference on the photo, and I'll just slide it along and check, is my angle the same? And if it is, that's great. If it's not, it will show me whether my angle is too steep or too shallow. And it's really, really helpful to do that, because firstly, it reminds us, it really highlights quite objectively how accurate we are. And that's what I need to see. It's not, do I think it looks okay, but is it really okay? So that's really helpful. But secondly, as you said here, Edgar, we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. I don't mean we all make the same mistakes, but me, Stephen Travers, I tend to make the same mistakes. Edgar, you tend to make the same mistakes with angles, whether you go too steep or not steep enough, too sharp, too shallow. And you've said yourself, you exaggerate shallow angles and make sharp angles too shallow. So firstly, when by checking, and this is why we critique, why we should critique after every drawing, by checking our angles using the sliding strip of paper, it just confirms to us, are we accurate or not? It tells us which way we're not accurate. It lets us then focus. So I'm pretty good on angles within a certain range. But when the angles start to get really steep, so particularly say if we're looking up a street, the angles at the very top of the closest buildings, they can feel almost vertical. That can be challenging to get those as vertical as they should be, or as near vertical as they should be. And so I have to pay really special attention with those, because otherwise I don't make them strong enough. I don't make them sharp enough. So yeah. Diane McGregor, where is eye level? How do you find it? Yes. Yeah, look, I mean, it's difficult for me here just with my face and no pen and paper, because a picture does tell 1,000 words in some things, but eye level is what's called the horizon line in lots of videos. I find it unhelpful, because the apparent horizon in many scenes is not the same as the horizon line in perspective. And so eye level simply explains what it is. It's the level of the eyes when we're looking at the scene. But if I'm looking up or looking down, it's still the level of the eyes. And so if I'm standing in a certain spot and I'm looking down, so that everything we're seeing in the field of vision is below my eye level, then eye level won't be in the scene. Or if I take a photo looking down, eye level won't be in the photo. It will be above. So, there are those things to work out too. But I really recommend my perspective playlist. I know I've got like 100 videos on one of them, but I've got 20 on another video, a perspective playlist, sort of like a perspective course. Well, it says a 20 video course. I think there's 23 videos on it now. Every now and then I squeeze another one onto it. But they're pretty much where I've chosen one perspective area I think is a good one. And then there's a couple of videos I've squeezed into it that are really applying all of these things into life situations. I think there's a very helpful one of a street scene in a Scottish village, Stonehouse, where the street, as it goes away, it looks roughly a straight street, but the ground goes up and down and there's a slight curve at the end. How does this affect perspective, vanishing points, and so forth? I think that's a particularly helpful video. If you feel like, well, I've seen all these videos and I've understood the little boxes on the horizons and all the little lines going to vanishing points, but when I look at real life, it doesn't seem to match up. I can't relate real life to the 2-point perspective videos with boxes and little simplified houses that I see on YouTube. Does anyone have that problem? Does anyone have that problem that you've watched so many videos on perspective, little boxes, and you understand them, but you then can't relate that to life? And I think there are reasons why that happens, and it's not your fault. I think it's the video's fault. Again, I got videos that show that talk about why we have so many problems with perspective videos. And it's basically because the conceptualization that's presented in those videos is a legacy from when this was all about architecture for architects, and it was all about drafting and architectural displays. And the needs of an architect in this, or a drafter for an architect, is not the same as the needs of an artist. The focus is different, and what we need to know is different. So Diane, try my perspective playlist. I've been trying to put more things in perspective playlist. Hernandez is saying, I draw human bodies, fantastic, and always start at the hips. Yeah, it comes down to intuition and hang on, different person. Yep. And look, starting at the hips is a great place to start for all sorts of reasons. And I often start in the center of a subject because I find it's when you draw freehand and you can't erase anything, then you can go up and down. And if you're a little bit out as you go, that error doesn't go as far. If you start at the top and work down, then the error can travel a lot further down. But if you start in the center, the error can only advance so much that way or so much that way or in the other direction. So I find it's a way of helping to stay more accurate. Sometimes I do start top or bottom because that makes sense with the scene. And I think it's always, let's not get dogmatic about rules. Let's always be thinking what's going to work best for this particular drawing that's in front of me. When do I usually go live? What I'm trying to do is my Sunday night at 8:30 p.m. and my Thursday morning, I'm in Sydney, Australia, so I'm on Australian Eastern Standard Time, or Thursday morning with the same session, the same kind of topic. And the idea is that one of them is probably better for Europe, which is the Sunday night one, which is Sunday morning in Europe. And this time slot, I'm hoping, is a little more friendly for people in the Americas. And I think if you live in Asia, you can, sort of Japan to India, you can probably manage either of them. But it's yeah. So it's just trying to accommodate our very unhelpful time zones for the rest of the world in Australia. DB in Arizona, I'm describing you. Great. And Bouquet 10 CB. Okay, Edgar saying, yeah, most perspective videos don't handle anything more complex than 2 to 3 points and very simple shapes. Don't even try to look for how to rotate. Yeah, look, I mean, it depends what you want to do and how you want to draw. I don't particularly draw with mega multiple perspective angles. I really love looking at some of that stuff. Paul Heaston on Instagram does amazing sort of very many perspective point, and that's great. But that stuff really is starting to really sort of push our creativity. I mean, it's often engaging, beyond reality, and starting to really, become very, very creative, and for that reason, a lot more challenging as well. But then drawing's all about creativity. Pipotherium, greetings from London. It's a good time for Melbourne in Australia. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, the hips define its position and movement. Yeah, actually, it sets you up for each direction, doesn't it? Yeah, yeah, and it also, I imagine, like, I'm not a great figure drawer. I don't do a lot of figure drawing. I love looking at well drawn figures and life drawing, especially charcoal life drawing. I think it really works well. I follow some amazing artists on Instagram, a range of things, and this is one of them. But yeah, the hips. One of the problems I have when I do draw figures for my street scenes, and I'm actually thinking I really should spend a day where I just draw figures and get over this. But I find I don't position, because I usually start with the head, which is why I'm really interested in starting at the hips, and I work out the head and the feet. Draw the head. I don't usually end up positioning the back well for the neck. I don't really have the reference knowledge in my head because I've never paid enough attention to that. And so then the head kind of looks awkward with the body. And if there's any twisting or movement in the body, it ends up looking very stiff and wooden, very much like a Thunderbird's puppet, if that makes any sense to anyone. Yeah, if we start with the hips, then in a sense, where it's a bit like what I said before. Errors can't move as far as No, it's a great thought. Okay, so the architectural weaknesses. The first one's perspective angles. We draw them parallel instead of increasing the angle above eye level. Second point, we have multiple eye levels. The third point, because we have 20, so we better keep moving. The third point, I think, most common weakness, and this is a big one because visually it has a big impact. In fact, it may have a more immediate impact than wrong angles or multiple eye levels. When that happens, often we look at the scene and we think something's not quite right here, especially if the angles aren't too far out. But with this third one, we see it straight away all the time, and that's weak lines. And exactly how they and they all come from a lack of confidence, but exactly how they look simply depends how our lack of confidence expresses itself in what we do with our hands. And this is an area I was talking before about technical skills versus conceptual skills with drawing. This is where improving our technical skills can make a difference. It's not the key thing in a drawing, and I think it's actually an easy thing to overcome. So don't worry if you've got this. But by weak lines, I mean feathery lines, where we just lack the confidence to draw a straight line. We're afraid it's not going to be straight. We're afraid it's going to wobble, whatever. And so we do lots of little lines that slowly grow the line in the direction we want. But sadly, it's hard to line those up exactly. So they're often at a slight angle, I've noticed too, and kind of like overlap, so that they do end up going down, but with lots of lines this way. Is anyone here guilty of feathery lines? Look, feathery lines can be a great technique to draw lines with if we're drawing feathers, or if we're drawing something else where that captures the effect we want. There's nothing wrong with any way of making marks on the paper. In fact, we should experiment with making different visual effects with our marks on the paper. The only question is this a good set of marks for the effect I want? And by effect I want, I mean by how I want my drawing to look. Oh, we're having some confessions. Edgar's guilty of smaller strokes. And it really comes from lack of confidence, I suspect, Edgar. We're afraid that if we do a nice straight line, I'll get it wrong, and particularly if we draw in ink, and therefore we can't remove it. That I think is a problem, because it does create this fuzzy, fat, blurry feel. Almost certainly not what we want for, say, a corner of a building or the top of a window or the whatever. There are so many lines in architecture. So particularly if we draw buildings, it is important to work on our skill of being able to draw comfortable, confident, and relatively fast. Now, not out of control, but relatively fast straight lines. And how long we need to teach ourselves to draw them just depends on what we draw and how large we draw it. I need to be able to draw a comfortable straight line, whatever size I need in the drawings I draw. And that'll make a difference, whether we draw this size or double that size. So that's a simple thing to improve. Now, I said they all come from weak lines, all come from lack of confidence. Another weak line is a very slowly drawn line. And usually when lines are drawn very slowly, people are also holding the nib right down close because there's a lot of concentration. Is the line looking straight? Nothing's going to make it harder to draw a nice straight line by drawing it too slowly and concentrating too much. Because what we get is a very uneven ink flow. Now, the ink, whatever the mechanism for the pen and whatever the paper is, however absorbent it is or isn't, the ink flows out onto the paper as the nib's in contact with the paper. And the longer it stays in contact with any one point of the paper, the more ink will flow onto that section of the paper. And the faster it moves across the paper, the opposite. The slower, the less ink will get on that bit of paper. So in other words, our line will start to look thicker and thinner, thicker and thinner, thicker and thinner as our speed changes. What I want to do, the skill I want to develop is a nice even line. And part of that comes at the start, and look, I'm guilty of this, is I have to be, in a sense, drawing my line before the pen hits the paper, so that when the pen hits the paper, it's already going at the speed I need it to be going, and it's not going too slowly. I mean, I could have made a separate point of this. Don't let the pen touch the paper before you're actually moving, because you'll start to have ink. If we rest the pen on the paper, the ink starts to flow out into the paper and we get a blob at the start of our line, which is fine if we want a blob at the start of our line. And that kind of can be effective at times in certain styles. But if I don't want that, then I need to make sure I don't let the pen rest on the paper. So this is a drawing technique thing, and these are fairly simple skills to work on once we're aware that these are causing our drawing to look certain ways that we don't want. Okay, so weak lines, that's number 3. Number 4, the fourth thing, weakness I see over and over again, and you might be guilty of this if you feel that your drawings look a bit cartoon-like, more cartoon-like than you want. Cartoon-like is fine if we want cartoons. But even in most comics, we don't want things these days to look cartoon-like particularly. And that's the lack of depth lines. And by depth lines, I just mean that third line that goes back from the front. So, we have height, we have width, and that can give us a shape, a two-dimensional shape, a rectangle, say. But if we want to rotate it slightly and see down the side, then we need a third line that represents the depth. And particularly in architecture, and particularly in two-point perspective, we have depth lines visible down one side of all the architectural elements. So if we have a wall that's moving away from us, then, and there's a window in that wall, then there are different ways the architect could have designed the window. The window could be flush with the wall, and so the glass is absolutely the same plane as the wall, whatever it's made from. But more common is that something either protrudes out from the wall or the window is set back into the wall a little bit. And either way, we get depth because now the plane is broken. And we need depth for the coming out or the going in. But it's not just the coming out or the going in of the window. How is the glass held in place? Are there older building? Are there wooden strips that hold the glass in place? Because those wooden strips are three-dimensional and they have a depth as well. And depending how the glass sits, that might be more obvious. There might be several wooden beads, beading of wood to hold the glass in place and whatever. There could be like a decorative border that comes out from the wall around the window. And on that border that comes out, there can be more decoration that comes out again. And all of these things give us depth lines. Now, how much we draw depends on the size of our drawing and how much detail we're wanting to include and how we're drawing it. But oversimplification of depth and also how far away the thing is. So if it's a building that slopes away from us, we might draw, what we probably will draw, more depth lines, say at the window that's closest to us than a window that's a lot further away, simply because it gets too small to do. And there's no problem with that. One of the things that will make a drawing look strange, a drawing of a building look less realistic, ironically, is we try and draw all the detail right into the distance. And that usually means that the lines are closer together. It's all inkier and blacker than the closest objects where the lines are a bit further apart. So we want to simplify as we move further away. But certainly in my closest elements, architectural elements, I want all the depth lines I can include to be there, because the brain will see that and then it will presume that in the parts where I haven't drawn it. One of the things I've become, this is just a digression now, but I think it's an important one. Maybe even it's a video. Maybe I'll do a video on this today. But one of my preoccupations at the moment drawing is just being aware of the fact that when I look at a photo, when I look at a scene, we'll say photo, it has a certain visual has a certain visual impact. And so some things stand out really clearly and other things stand out but not so clearly. And some things you have to rummage around to find them in the scene. Now, I don't have to copy that, of course, because I don't think we should be copying photos when we draw. I think we should be improving on photos when we draw. We should use photos as a starting point. Now, if we want to draw a photo, there's probably lots of stuff about the photo that we really like and we want to capture. We want to capture the effect of this. But as artists, we should be creatively kind of going beyond that, or at least feel free to, and be thinking about, can I? But one of the things I've got to be aware of is if I'm wanting to capture the visual impact of the scene, that means I have to show control of my marks in lots of ways, my lines, marks. Now I control them by the pen I use. That's important to realize. And it may not be so helpful to use the one pen for the whole scene. I may be able to create a better effect, a more realistic effect, by changing the pens I use. Because there's only so much variation with a pen I can get with a slow and heavier line than a faster, quicker line. There's only still so much difference, and I can certainly get a better difference between line thickness and weight more easily by changing my pen. I would recommend still use the same brand because pens look different, but using a thinner pen. But beyond that, actually drawing less marks. And I think the example that sums it up most clearly is if I'm drawing a brick house, I can look at the photo and I can see all the bricks at a certain distance, and it's really clear that it's a brick drawing. But when you look at let's say the cottage, you see the cottage first. You see the walls and the windows and the veranda and the garden and stuff. And then you think, oh, it's a brick cottage. But I've seen so many drawings of brick cottages where the bricks have been drawn in such detail, even if they're drawn well. Now, they're often not, because let's face it, it's hard to have the patience to draw all the bricks accurately. But even if they're drawn well, and even if they're drawn at the right scale, the sheer volume of black ink that on a scale, in a scale sense, is much larger, much thicker lines than the lines between the bricks are, just overwhelms the drawing. And all we see is the blackness of the bricks that are drawn, and they overwhelm the windows, the doors, anything else really. Now, this is where our line work has gotten out of balance with the visual impact of our reference. Does this make sense? How did the strategies change when drawing a landscape view versus a still life? Are you talking about paper orientation, Edmund, or talking about subject? I actually don't draw still lifes much. G'day, Chuck. I don't draw still lifes much. Subject, okay. Nothing changes at all. Perspective is everywhere. The rules of perspective apply to absolutely everything in our scene. If I do a landscape, then perspective applies. If I do a vase and a teapot and a pile of books and an apple on a table, the rules of perspective still apply. Perspective is simply how something looks from a different view, from a particular viewpoint. And when you change your viewing point, when you change where you're standing in relation to the object, whether you move up or down, left or right, or a combination of those, then the perspective changes, the angles change, and the way the objects look change. It doesn't matter what the objects are. The reason we get caught up with perspective with buildings is because buildings are very large objects, which means the changes are often more dramatic. But also, most buildings are fairly boxy, and Therefore, the perspective changes in a very obvious way that we're very used to seeing without thinking about it. And therefore, if we get things wrong, it's more obvious. With a tree, also, see, because trees are an irregular kind of natural shape. With a tree, the trees still follow perspective, but it's not so obvious because a tree can be almost any shape. But think of a figure. You know, if I stand straight onto a figure and look at it, I get a very different view than if I stand above a figure and look down, or if I lie on the ground and look up. And if you enjoy manga, anime, they're very good. The artists there are very good at applying perspective to the human figure and getting very dramatic angles of figures that sort of loom above us, or come straight at us, or even just lots of dramatic perspective angles with a head. So this perspective is very different to this, is very different to this, or this. So here we have 1 point perspective, the looking straight on. Hang on, yeah, looking straight on. I hate this mirrored thing. I can't. I'm not well coordinated with that. And here we have 2 point perspective. Where we have sort of the corner, and we have the vanishing points. Now it's not as clear cut with a sort of ovoid type shape as it is with a rectangular prism sort of shape as a building, but it's still there. Okay. Number 5, sorry, and that's scale. Not having a consistent scale working across the whole drawing. So scale is basically everything. Well, it's how large or small we draw something in relation to life or what we're drawing from. So if I'm doing a drawing from a photo and I want to double the scale, then I want my drawing to finish up twice the size of the reference, and everything in the drawing needs to be twice the size of what it is in the reference. The problem is when I don't get this consistent, and so parts of my drawing end up being too large and parts of my drawing end up being too small. Each little thing may look right when you look at it, but they don't actually go together. And I don't know whether anyone's ever done a street scene, but if you look carefully, if you were to move the figures next to the buildings at the level that they're at, they're absurdly small or large. They either couldn't get into the doors, or the doors are enormous, and so forth. This is a scale problem. It's keeping everything consistent. If we're doing still lifes, it means that the teapot ends up looking smaller than the apple, or the apple's way too big in relation to the teapot. The teapot might look fine, the apple might look fine, but the scale isn't right. I think particularly with architecture, particularly with street scenes, this is a problem where we have lots of very different elements that are quite distinct objects that we include together. So keeping the scale correct, it's tricky, say, with where there's often great depth of plane. If I'm doing lots of the clutter at street level, if I'm bus stop furniture and posts and bollards and garbage bins and all this stuff, as they move towards me, they're getting larger as well. So I've got to allow for that in my scale adjustment. So scale can be a big problem in architecture. We need to keep the scale consistent with everything in our scene, allowing for the distance that it might be from the front. Okay, the 6th weakness, I would say, is foreshortening. Now, foreshortening is the simple truth that as something moves further away, it gets smaller. That's all perspective is. Perspective is just that as something gets further away, it gets smaller. It gets smaller this way and it gets smaller this way. When it gets smaller this way, that creates the perspective angles because the wall, the corner of a building that's closer ends up being longer than the corner that's further away. And when you join those up, you get the perspective angles. But it's not just on this in this direction, it's in this direction, and this is foreshortening. As a wall moves further away, then horizontally everything gets smaller or gets narrower, as we would say. Now, I probably see more problems with foreshortening, with the narrowing this way, the getting smaller this way, than the getting smaller this way. And this is the thing that tells us that on a wall that slides away from us, the windows become narrower if they're all the same size in life. They become narrower as they move further down the wall. And it's not just the windows that become narrower, but the gaps between them become narrower as well, because everything becomes narrower. And so let's say we have a wall that might have 3 windows, a door in the middle, and 3 windows on the other side. The door is actually going to, if we measure a sort of a straight line, be a lot further down than what looks like halfway. So it's allowing for all of this, but it's often not done well. And what this means is that the proportions of the windows change. So they become, if they might be a fairly tall rectangle, and by the time we get down the end, they're looking more like squares. Anyone have this problem with their windows as they move down along? G'day, Scott. How are you? As they move down, there's someone else in Arizona, or there was earlier. As they move down away from us, we need to keep the proportions correct. They're going to be getting shorter as the top and bottom lines converge, but we need to bring the widths closer and closer together. Again, if I'm drawing from a photo, I just need to observe carefully what's happening. I just need to observe carefully. Careful observation is so important. Huge problem. This isn't a problem with architecture. This is a problem with drawing. Huge problem that we just don't realize how much we have to see before we try and put the pen on the paper. And I think the problem is we think we know how to observe, and we do know how to observe. Obviously, we know how to observe. We do know how to observe to live and to do things, to get places and blah, blah, blah. But we probably haven't learned the very specific ways we need to observe in order to draw. And that's the problem. We have this skill that we've developed for all of life, and there is obviously overlap, but there are things that specifically we need to be able to focus on doing in observation if we're going to draw. And we just don't realize that. And again, so much of the weaknesses in drawing is not a problem with drawing at all. It's not a problem with holding the pen or producing the lines or the marks. It's simply that I haven't realized when I've started to put the lines on the paper that I haven't seen what I've needed to see. And if I haven't seen in my reference, whether it's photo or in life, if I haven't seen what I need to see when I start to put the pen on the paper, then I'm either drawing from my memory, or I'm drawing of those objects in other places, or I'm drawing from my imagination, I'm just making it up, or I'm actually just guessing. And quite frankly, a lot of the drawings I see, it could be any one of those three. I need to learn how to observe. I do have an observation in drawing playlist. It only has, I think, half of it. It's my shortest playlist, has about 5 or 6 videos. If you're not sure of your drawing observation, they're early videos, but I think they're still very good ones. So worth having a look. But foreshortening, anyone have a problem with foreshortening? And if you're finding this helpful, please hit the like button for me. Point number 7 is, and this relates a little bit to the depth lines, but it's make sure you draw all the overhangs. Architecture has a lot of overhangs, and by this I mean things that come out. The most obvious one that I see, the most obvious mistake, error I see is eaves. So now this isn't going to be on absolutely every architecture, but certainly in Australia, with houses, we have the box, if we think of a box with the walls, and then the roof comes down beyond where the walls are because the roof kind of overhangs. We have a section that comes out, which are called the eaves. Now, besides the fact that it actually changes visually the scale of the roof, it makes the roof appear larger, well, because it is larger, than if it went to the corners. So if we don't draw this, we actually end up with a differently proportioned building. But the eaves coming out, and so the guttering usually hangs on where the eaves come out and where the roof comes down, and then you have the gutters there. The gutters come out even further, however wide the gutters are, however far we are. And this is just often missed completely. Or the walls are drawn and the gutters, instead of coming out beyond the walls, they're basically just a strip that's drawn onto the top of the wall. And again, the depth is lost, but the whole eaves can be lost as well. Hernandez, cylinders helped with foreshortening. Yep. Cylinders can be a great way to visualize all of that. Thanks for that, Hernandez. Yeah. So another area where we see this would be windowsills, where under the window there's a originally it would have been a piece of wood that would have framed the window within the brickwork, and that would come out slightly. I often again see these sills just drawn as a shape stuck on. There's no depth that doesn't actually come out. The overhang is not there. Draw the overhangs. It may not come out much, but it's part of the architecture, and it makes if we don't do this, it's like everything is just drawn on to the flat wall at the front, and that's going to start to give us a cartoon-like look. Okay, number 8. This is a biggie, not just for drawing architecture. This is a biggie with drawing in general. A really, really common weak area I find is what people seem to call textures. Thanks, Blair King. You can call me Stephen. I haven't been called Mr. Travers in a teaching capacity since 1982, I think. And I was called lots of other things besides that. What do I think about critiquing people who want to send their drawing on stream? I can't see your drawings on stream. I can only see your comments. So, yeah. So I'm afraid I can't. It's not something I can do, because I do have to be realistic about how all this works, and I could be very easily swamped with and I do, I get lots of people on Instagram messaging me their drawings asking for critiquing, and I just have to say I can't, because I could end up with hundreds of these every week very quickly. It's enough. It's enough making the videos. So yeah, but look, I do have videos on how to critique your drawing yourself. I do have videos on all the things that I think of when I'm looking at a drawing. In fact, these 20 points can give you a checklist of the sorts of things that you need to be looking at with your drawings. So if you jot them down as they go, so I should try and speed them up a bit. But number 8, look, I've called it textures, because that's the phrase that people use. They talk about doing textures, doing a leaf texture, doing brick textures, doing the ground texture. Basically, a surface sort of three-dimensionality impact of some type. And the problem is that when people talk about textures, which is a good word and it could be used really well, but they often end up using it to mean pattern. So it's like, what's the texture for leaves? What's the texture for the ground? What's the texture for this? What they're saying is, what's a pattern I can use to represent that? And like, that question is, I think, shows that the thinking is in the wrong place. Now, a pattern is fine if I want to do a stylized, more symbolic thing. If I'm not after realism, if I'm after something more surrealistic, then patterns can be great. Like, there's nothing wrong with patterns. But I'm making the assumption that most people watching my channel and listening to me are wanting to capture a sense of realism in their drawing. And if that's the case, then patterns are not a helpful way of thinking, because we don't have, it's not a, even in things like brickwork where there is a pattern in the sense that there's a repeated geometric kind of thing. It's how it looks in life. That's not the visual emphasis we get. Sort of like the point I was talking about earlier. Instead of thinking of textures and of patterns, I think of what's the visual effect. How does the thing look in my reference or in life? How does it look? Whether it's a tree with leaves, whether it's bricks on the front of a building. I don't mean what's the detail. I don't mean exactly what is it, but when I look at this picture, what's the impact of the brickwork, the tiles? What do I actually see? What do I notice? Do I notice anything? If I don't notice anything really, then maybe I leave it out. If I notice the brickwork just a little bit, but it's not overpowering, then I don't want to draw it in a way that's overpowering. I maybe just want to suggest it in a few little bits to indicate that it's there, but not to have it look very obvious. If I notice the shadows more than anything else of the surface, then maybe I want to try and capture the feel of the shadows, the effect of the shadows. But what I'm trying to do is, in my drawing, create the same visual effect, create the same visual balance between what's obvious and what's not obvious in life or in my reference in my drawing. Does this all make sense? And there's a very big difference between those two. Number 9 is that when people draw architecture, trees and foliage are often a weakness. And I think this is because we get better at what we draw more of, and we get better at what we draw with more consideration. Because I was talking before about the video I did last night, about 90% of the importance of drawing happens before we pick up the pen. 90% of the success, I think, is determined by what goes on in our mind, the creative thinking and translation before we start to ink on the paper. Things that we think about more, we're going to draw better. And when we have a favorite subject like architecture, we often focus on, we think about, we observe the architecture so much more carefully because we want to, we enjoy it, and we know we need to. What then happens is there's a tree next to our building, and I go to draw the tree, and I'm not so interested in trees, and the tree's a bit of a nuisance, but I need to put it there. And, trees can look like anything, so it doesn't really matter. And I end up with a weak looking tree next to a stronger looking building, maybe a weak looking hedge or a garden or something. But I end up with a weakness now in my scene. And it's like if I was casting for a play and I cast really good actors for the main roles. And then I say, oh, the support acts, they don't really matter. And I put people in who really can't do a very good job. Well, it ruins the whole play because all the elements have to work together well. And so if I enjoy drawing architecture, I need to make sure that my trees and my foliage are as strong in terms of their skill level, are strong in terms of the way I've thought about them and understood the process and how they fit into the scene and how I'm going to do them as my architecture. As I said, I so often see drawings with buildings where all you notice is how badly drawn the trees are, which is a shame. I need to bring, it's the same if with figures or cars, anything that I don't necessarily enjoy drawing or wanting to draw as much, if it's in my scene, I need to bring those elements up to the same level. And I've had to work at cars, I've had to work at people. So number 10, another weak spot is symmetry. Buildings often are the same, but just mirrored from left to right or top to bottom. There's a lot of repeated elements, particularly in more traditional architecture. And particularly where there's decorative scroll work, where there's round curlicue things and different shapes that come off from both sides that are the same. Well, in my drawing, it needs to look symmetrical. And that can be complicated if I'm not looking straight on, but it's at a side angle, it's a 2-point perspective. Then the way it looks further away, besides being flipped, besides being mirrored, it's actually distorted in a different way because of the perspective. But I've got to work at getting all that looking right, because if it's meant to be symmetrical, then I need to draw it symmetrically. Now, that's a video I've been meaning to make actually for a while. So maybe I should could do that today if I can find a reference. But having things that look the same on each side, it can be enough of a challenge, because it's not just getting the objects the same, it's getting the gaps between them the same as well. So capturing symmetry is a focus we need to have with our drawing. Okay, number 11, this is another big one, and that's proportions, getting proportions correct. Now, I talked about scale earlier, but proportions are more the different parts of the one thing. So if I'm drawing a tower, and a tower might be a tall rectangular box with a tall, thin pyramid on top as a spire. If the tower and the spire part, the box and the triangle part, are, in my reference, the same size, then I want them to be the same size in my reference. If my tower is one length and my spire is, say, only 2/3 of that, then the proportion of the spire to the tower is not correct, and that would change the way the whole thing looks. But even in, say, the box, if it's a tall, thin box and my box is a bit wide, then that's going to look different. And if the tower, even if the tower is the same height as the box, which it should be, because my box is now too wide, as the tower comes down, it's going to widen further at the base. And so the triangle is going to be fatter looking than I want. And so the proportions have changed, and it means that the building may still be recognizable, the structure, but it looks like a different one. And so keeping our proportions, keeping the relationship between height and width of all the parts of our scene. And one of the things I often see is where the whole outline of the building has been done first, and then there's lots of elements to put in. So then there's lots of columns and maybe windows between the columns, and then in the windows there are different elements of the window in big grand architecture. And it may not look so obvious that the scale's not right when we draw the big box, but when we start to, if you like, divide it up into smaller areas, smaller shapes to put these other things in, they don't fit. Or we can fit them in, but we have to squeeze them in. And so the windows maybe are too thin and narrow. They might be relatively rectangular ones, but they're really skinny in my drawing, because to put 6 windows in, I had to make them thinner, or else I had to not take them up as high. And so these are all proportion issues. So maintaining proportions accurately is really important with architecture, because, as I said before, with a tree, if the proportions of my tree aren't the same, it's not usually so obvious if the tree's drawn well otherwise. But with a building, with the architecture, we can end up with things that just look crazy. So proportions, and I've got videos on that as well. Okay, number 12, and this is an architecture thing. That's where people mix drawing lines with rulers and then drawing freehand. Now, this is a personal thing, but most things are. I don't think ruled lines and freehand lines go well together most of the time in a drawing. For me, ruled lines always have the kind of overtone of drafting, making plans, architecture kind of focus, as in an architect's focus, and that's great. But I don't think they go together well. I think they kind of each tell a different story. So work out what we're trying to do and do it. Usually the lines are drawn with a ruler because there's a lack of confidence to draw them that long freehand. But remember, we can draw a long straight line as two shorter straight lines joined together, and that's often a better way to go. And if I were doing that, I'd look at the 2 points where I want the line to go to, and I would put a dot in the middle, or even 2 dots in the middle. I can draw the line in 3 places and draw each of those 3 lines together, one after the other. So I'm not trying to draw past the first dot. I want to finish right on that dot with a nice gliding lift off, so I don't get a blob of ink, and then do the same thing twice after. Okay. 13. Look, I've actually touched on 13 before when I looked at proportions, and that's what I've called the infill elements being distorted. That's the effect of those windows I talked about, where there isn't. We've divided our building up into spaces, and now we don't have room because the proportions aren't right. We don't have room for the things we fill in the spaces with. So it's really a proportion issue. Stefan, when I try to start, g'day, Stefan, when I try to start good name with big forms, I find it hard to measure the proportions correctly without any details that break them down. Yeah. And that's why when you watch my drawing process, you'll find that most commonly I actually start with maybe a central window or a central door, and I actually draw the windows first, working really hard to keep them in proportion. The danger of doing it this way is particularly with the line thickness. You get line thickness creep, and it gets wider and wider the more the wall lines, in this case vertical lines, we do. So it's but I find that doing the windows and then I put the doors, then I put the corners of the building in, is a more accurate way for me to do that. Now, if I were drawing with a pencil underdrawing and erasing that at the end, then it wouldn't be so bad because I could do that rough blocking out. People often ask me, why don't you do rough blocking out? And I think, I get that asked all the time. And I think, because I'm drawing with a pen, can't you see there isn't any pencil? And I don't want all that rough blocking at the end. Now, I could draw that way, and there's nothing wrong with drawing that way. Lots of people draw that way. I've drawn that way in the past. But I want to learn to draw freehand in ink, and I need to without pencil. And so I need to develop a way of thinking, of starting and progressing my drawing so that I can get that accuracy. And this is the way, Stefan, I've found to do it. So if that was helpful, please hit the like button for me. Okay, number 14. And this I think is a really important one too with architecture, and that's edges. I find this is really important with whatever we draw, and this is something I've become more and more aware of, and that I've worked at in my drawings more and more. And if in the video I did last night, I started with some of the drawings I was doing 2.5 years ago for YouTube, and then some of my most recent drawings to show how much, well, I think I've improved. I mean, I didn't think I needed to improve that much. I don't think when I started, I certainly didn't think I could improve this much. But it makes me realize how much I've benefited from all the understanding that I've had to work out, and not just work out, but put into words to make videos for. And I think it's that extra step that has really let me focus much more self-consciously on what I'm doing than I would have, and therefore help me to apply it more because I'm so much more aware of what I'm doing. And it's meant that I've changed, not changed, but I've developed as I've seen more in what the process is, what I'm trying to do. I've been able to imagine more of what I want to do and therefore work out ways to do it. And I'm really quite surprised at how much my drawings have changed in the last 2.5 years. And I'm drawing things now that I would never have thought you could draw at all with ink, let alone I could draw with ink. So I'm not blowing my trumpet. I'm saying this can happen. And it happens as we come to understand the process more, and as we learn to focus on actually having a goal for our drawing, have a sense of how we're wanting it to look, because all of this gives us the direction we need to make the choices about what marks will be put on the paper. Impatience is a very unhelpful thing in drawing. But this point is the edges. We talk about the texture, which is, if you like, the surface, but the edges. And with architecture, so often sharp, straight lines are drawn, or just in drawing, that creates a visual effect. It gives the effect of a sharp edge. But often, and that's great if we want a sharp edge. That's great if it's a polished marble block or if it's a polished bronze cube with sharp edges. But what if it's the corner of a brick building where it's actually like you get the little ins and outs of where the bricks are, where it goes in slightly for the mortar. The visual effect of that is often not a straight line. Now, it depends how far away we are and all that. But this is the sort of thing I mean. If we have steps, stone steps, where over 300 years it's been weathered and it's this lovely rounded feeling. If I draw a straight line for that edge, well, I've now made it look different to how it is. And all of these things, all of these little ways that we've drawn something that's less real looking than our reference, all add up to a drawing that doesn't look very real, even if it's relatively accurate in its perspective and so forth. So these are all the things that that I'm thinking now. So I pay particular attention to the edges. The edges of, and edges, or silhouettes we could think of them as, are really important in drawing, particularly silhouettes that, like against the sky, where we see them really clearly, because we see them really clearly, and therefore the brain jumps on them to get information ahead of other parts that we have to look for more. And so I want my silhouette edges particularly to tell a very accurate story, to create a very accurate effect. And again, I often talk about with trees, if we just draw a black line around the tree canopy, because on my photo, that's how it looks. But in life, a tree is not a cutout shape hard against the sky. It's a three-dimensional, often approximately spheroidal shape moving away from us like this, that creates all different visual effects at the edges. And in fact, the edges is not the part of the tree closest to us. Usually there are parts of the tree coming out towards us that visually makes them more prominent in our real life scene. This is where we have to understand that photos have weaknesses as well as strengths. They capture a lot of detail. Absolutely, that's a strength. But they don't present it to us visually always in a way that's very easy to understand or use. And that's particularly the case with trees. And that's why so many trees look flat, because we've drawn them looking as two-dimensional as they look on the paper. That would be a good video as well. So edges, pay attention to the edges. How do people feel about their edges? Look, number 15, this is very much an architecture thing, and that's to be aware of the ground level. One of the big weaknesses about these box perspective videos, I think, is that it's like a fireside chat, isn't it? Is that they so often don't say that it only works this way if the ground is flat. So in other words, where the building hits the ground is parallel to the top of the building, because the ground, the top of the building are parallel to each other. G'day, Tyler. Mate, you're the third person from Arizona who's in on this today. I don't know what's happening in Arizona, but I like it. Lots of good drawing happening there, obviously. It's so cold in Sydney at the moment. I think I would love to be in Arizona right now. But the ground line that we see in these little perspective diagrams, it feels like it's part of it all. And it is part of the perspective angle, but it's only because it's parallel to the horizontal line at the top of the building. If the ground is up, down, or up and down, then the ground line has nothing to do with the perspective angles. The ground line has nothing to do with eye level. G'day there, Emily. Has nothing to do with any of that stuff, because perspective only applies in the way the boxes show to parallel horizontal lines. So if the ground's going up, this is not a perspective angle, and I mustn't try and fit it into the perspective pattern that the other horizontal lines of that building are. Now, this is where really careful observation solves everything, because if I can see what I'm drawing, then I simply need to look at what I'm drawing to see what happens at ground level. So if a building's going up, then we only have to, go and look at this in life, and we can see how it works. And we should actually, if we've never done this. What happens is that the building level goes up as the street goes up. And so the top of the door down here might be actually level with the bottom of the door 3 buildings along. And there's architectural adjustments to the base of the building to allow for that. We have a real problem if we're somehow thinking that this line, ground level line sloping up, is meeting at the vanishing point with all the other perspective angles from the buildings on this street. Okay, I do have, I think, really helpful video on perspective uphill perspective. If you go to my 20 video perspective course playlist, I'm sure that video is on that playlist. I have a downhill one as well. I have one when the street goes up and down and around the corner. I have one on curved streets. In all of these situations, these little perspective box video, perspective videos don't tell you that they don't apply in the same way in these situations. And most of drawing life is not boxes on dead flat plains to the horizon like we're in some sort of desert, unless maybe we're in Arizona, and a lot of people are apparently. So if these ramblings are interesting, please hit the like button for me. Yeah, and so okay, point 16 was uphill, downhill, ground line. Oh no, okay, I've switched these two around. I really, I talked about edges before. The edge where the building hits the ground is the way it looks in life is very rarely a straight line, a hard straight line, because at ground level, there's often a lot of visual. Now, approximately it is, but in life, in practice, at ground level, there's a lot of visual clutter. There might be little weeds growing at ground level. There might be little bits of rock and dirt, gravel pushed up against ground level. There may be deterioration of the building material at ground level. And all of this creates little distortion ripples, even if there's nothing major, along ground level. And if I draw a straight line at the bottom of the building where the building touches the ground, if I do that at the start, sort of blocking out the building with my pen, well, I can't change it. And yet, in life, it's not the effect. See, this is why I've become so aware that when I draw, I'm drawing the effect. Yep, thanks, Journo Faye. Pushing the like button does get the algorithm to push out the vid on YouTube. Look, I tell you what really does excite the algorithm, just if you want to help me out. Not with this, because this is too long, but if you share my videos, if you share the link, the YouTube link, I don't mean just tell your friends, but if you send them a link and, and obviously only videos that you think are really helpful, that have really helped you. But if you send a link, which then they click on, that really excites the video. So if you've got friends who draw, I don't mean just send them out to people you know. I don't, there's no value in spamming. But yeah, if you've watched a video, you thought that was interesting, that was helpful, then send it to someone who draws. And that really excites the algorithm, which kind of excites me. Emily saying, I've recently been binge watching my perspective videos. I've drawn most of my life, but I have issues with like big landscapes because I have a hard time with the scaling. Do you draw them, Emily, from life or from photos, or do you create them in your imagination? Just let me know the answer to that. But with the ground line, don't rush to drawing a hard edge, because that's not how it looks. And it's all about, I've become aware, certainly for the way I draw, capturing the effect, not what I know is there or what might be there under certain circumstances, but what's the visual effect that I'm seeing? How can I capture that? And if you look at the video I posted last night, that the last one I've posted, that that compares some of my first drawings for videos 2.5 years ago with my most recent drawings, that I think describes the difference. I've gone from drawing outlines to accurately draw shapes of buildings to trying to capture the visual effect of what I see. And so textures, surfaces, edges become so more important, but not just those things, but also the balance, the balance of which ones are more obvious when I look at them and which ones aren't. This is my thinking. This is my focus. This is what, in my head, these are all the creative translation issues that I'm thinking about, that then tell me, well, not tell me, they suggest to me marks that might be helpful to create these effects. And then I experiment with those marks for just 2 or 3 minutes before I draw to see, do they create the effect I want? And that includes the pen I use to create them, let me say, or whether I use several pens. So yeah, very important. What's Emily saying? From photos. Okay. Yeah, Hernandez is complaining of the heat. I'd love a bit of heat, right? I mean, look, yeah, if it's 10 o'clock if it's 10 degrees centigrade at 9 o'clock, I'm complaining of the cold here. But it's probably a pleasant spring day for Northern Europe. But okay, you're drawing from photos. Well, look, in that case, how do I with the scaling? Look, I think it kind of comes down to being able to visualize, observe accurately. I would say, firstly, draw one-to-one with your reference. So, print your reference the size you want to draw, simply because that's going to be the easiest way to do it. And it's also going to be the easiest way to compare your results. So, put the reference the way I do in my drawing videos, the reference to the left or right, depending which hand you draw with, and 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 then draw, and then compare. This is where I think the critiquing, it's not just saying, oh, that doesn't look right. It's, why doesn't this look right? What do I need to do to make it look right? Where is the problem? Look, and if we spent time drawing something and we're disappointed with the result, it can be easy just to run away from it. But we have to make ourselves look at it and say, why is this not working? Where is the problem? Because that sets us up to overcome that problem, or to push through it to some degree, or to at least be on that journey of overcoming that problem in my future drawings. Right? We need to be able to say what's not working. I did a drawing for a video 2 days ago. I think it's 2 days ago now. Yeah. And as I was drawing it, because these are fairly fast drawings for me, there might be 20 to 30 minutes, and I'm concentrating on lots of things when I'm drawing, even if I'm not talking on camera at the time of drawing, I'm thinking of lots of things. So I'm pretty preoccupied in my head. But I was unhappy with the way the perspective angles were looking. And I was thinking, as I was drawing it, I had the angles wrong at the tops of the rows of windows on the ground floor. And I thought that was the problem. I was trying to make little adjustments, but nothing I did worked. Nothing I did made it look better. And it was only after I'd finished the drawing and I was taking a photo of it, and so I was looking at it through the camera or through the phone, much smaller, that I thought, hang on, I think the problem is not the window perspective lines, but it's the very top roof line. And so then I put it back down and I got my strip of paper with the reference and I slid it along at the angle. And I could see, in fact, that I actually had made the line too angled, too sharp, which meant that everything compressed too quickly at the top and it didn't look right. Now, the interesting thing is, at first, that I thought I could see there was a problem. And I thought I could see where the problem was coming from while I was still drawing, and I was trying to adjust, but I could see that my adjustments weren't helping. It was only afterwards that, and really only because I was taking a photo for the thumbnail, that let me see, that's the problem. The problem is the top line is down too far. Now, there was something I could do about it, and I actually made last night's video about what I could do about it, because I suddenly realized this gives me a great opportunity to showcase, to really make clear the way when a perspective angle is wrong, but not too far wrong, but wrong enough to notice, how I fix it, how I make it in almost every case not noticeable at all. And I think I made it much less noticeable when I fixed it, and you can see them side by side. So I'm just trying to work out why I began that, but I can't remember why I began it, but really helpful. Maybe it was just a plug for yesterday's video. I don't know. I don't think so. I think that I had a purpose there. Oh, that's right. Just the importance to critique afterwards, to not be afraid of looking hard. And it can be awkward if we're disappointed in the drawing, but this is how we learn. And I've learned something from that. Why have my drawings improved more than I thought, a lot more than I thought in the last few years? I actually think it's because of my teaching. I don't mean because my teaching's amazing, but it's made me focus on, why am I doing things? What outcome do I get? What outcome am I wanting to have? I don't just sit there and think, I'm going to draw and pick up a bit of paper and start drawing straight away. It has slowed down my process, particularly at the start, because I'm making drawing videos, to make me think, well, why am I making this video? What's going to be the focus? What reference will show that? What am I going to say? So I think about it all so much in relation to this reference before I let the pen hit the paper. And I'm sure that is such a huge, that's the overwhelmingly large reason as to why my drawings improved. When our drawings don't improve, I think that's the name of the video, number one reason why your drawings don't improve. I don't say this in the video, but I think it's because I'm basically just doing the same thing over and over again. I'm seeing a photo that I like, something I'd like to draw, and I straight away get the pen and start to draw it. And I straight away think the same way, make the same marks, progress the drawing in the same way as I always have. And then I'm disappointed that I keep getting the same drawings and that there is no improvement. If nothing changes, nothing changes. For me, what changed was that I increasingly intensely, and I think in an increasingly sophisticated way, was trying to understand my drawing process. What am I trying to do? What result am I wanting? And just, yeah, thinking about this all the time meant that when I did pick up the paper and start to draw, I was far more ready, far more focused, had a far clearer idea of what every mark was hoping to do. Number 17. This is where we have eye level low down. So we can get some really nice, really dramatic views of buildings when we're relatively low and close looking up. Now, when this happens, we see the underside of any overhangs. So whether it's the eaves, whether it's decorative elements that come out, decorative surrounds for windows, or whether it's just the tops of windows that are set back and we can see, because we're looking up, we can see the setback. Making sure we draw those, but not just that we draw them, but we observe them carefully enough that we notice that as they go up, we see more of the underside the higher up they go. It's like a row of windows flipped on its side. As the windows move further along, we see that side of the window, of the thickness, the setback from the plane of the outer wall, more and more side on the further away it goes. It's the same, but vertically as we go up. So it's capturing not just that overhang, but the fact that our view of the overhang changes as it gets higher. And if we don't capture it, it does create an artificiality about it. Point number 18, lack of value. By that, I simply mean it's not dark enough. The lights and darks, the range of values is not as wide as it could be. And a lot of mid-tones, a lot of mid-values that in the end make things less clear because they tend to blur everything together. What we want is different contrasts next to each other. And at least somewhere in our scene, hopefully, if we can manipulate a really dark next to a really light, basically black next to white, which means no marks, no ink on the paper. That's important. Emily's a photographer as well, right? Yeah. Well, photography has great strengths, but it does have weaknesses too, particularly if we're going to draw from photos. So we want to make sure that we use all the strengths of the photo, but not copy the weaknesses of the photo, because that's where we have an opportunity as artists to go beyond the photo and to put back into it the 3 dimensions of trees and to capture the effects of trees in life that photos can't capture. What's Scott saying? I've spent so much time trying to see where I've made a proportion error. Fortunately, that doesn't happen quite as often. It can be a real poser to find sometimes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But look, anything we keep doing, we get better at. If we're thoughtful about it, we don't. It's not automatic, but presuming we're thoughtful about it, and that includes critiquing our own drawings. I can find mistakes faster and more easily now than I used to. Emily saying, you said you were self-taught. What inspired you to do drawing? Well, actually, I painted for 10 years before I did any drawing. I did oil painting for 10 years. I'll show you a painting. Oh, oh, oh. This is a painting I did of just a tangle of Australian bush in winter, sort of late in the afternoon. It has a little more kind of yellow undertones in parts of it in life from the sun. But yeah, I mean, it's probably less. Just grabbing another one if you're wondering. I'm coming back. Just and then I did lots of Australian flowers as well, because it was easier to sell the flowers than the trees. And yeah, but I painted, and I think actually it was painting the trees that was for me it led to the aha moment for me with how I was going to draw trees and draw leaves, because it really was the same approach I used with the painting, but I was just creating that effect by hatching. But yeah, Bobbin, getting to that. But I was on a trip to Europe in 2018 with our family. We were going to a wedding in Germany, and bye-bye, darling. Just saying goodbye to darling, who's going out. It's 9:45 in the morning here. And we were in Paris, and we were walking back to our Airbnb on a glorious sort of summer's evening. One of Paris's pink and golden late afternoon, early evening skies. And we were crossing in front of Notre Dame. And as we crossed it, the sun was actually behind the cathedral. And, we'd been out all day on our feet all day, typically exhausted. I had taken a sketchbook and I'd carried it around all day. I'd carried it around for probably 2 weeks at this stage and had done nothing. And I'd carried one around in 2015 and done nothing for 6-8 weeks in Europe. And I said to my youngest, because she was doing a fine arts degree, do you want to just sit in front of Notre Dame and draw it? Why don't we do that? I can give you a bit of paper. And she said, yeah, that'd be good. And I thought it'd be a nice father-daughter thing as well. Well, my drawing turned out. I was really happy with it, which was nice. And I love doing it. I love doing it with her, but I just love sitting there for that long, concentrating on one thing and just absorbing the surroundings. There are so many wonderful things to do with location sketching that go quite beyond the drawing. But we got back to her Airbnb, and she said, "Yeah, I'll take a photo." And that's when I learned about the photo apps on our phone, and we can manipulate how things look. That was worth discovering. I knew nothing about cameras or social media then, iPhones. Anyway, she said, "I'll post it on your Instagram." And I said, "No, don't do that. It's just a drawing. It's not a proper artwork." That's what I thought, because I'd only been posting my oil paintings. But anyway, I was lucky to get 30 likes to my oil paintings. I had a couple of hundred followers on Instagram. I think I had 150 likes overnight, and well, that was encouraging. But I had enjoyed the process, and so I kept sketching. When I came back to Australia, I didn't want to let go of that, so I just began to draw from my photos. and post them on Instagram. I had some art exhibits, some painting exhibitions I had to finish paintings for, but I kept working on the drawings because I just love them so much. And I had to give my painting studio over to another use for a family member to use for a little bit some years ago. And I thought just for a couple of months, and I thought, well, I'll just draw for those months in the house. It finished up being a couple of years. And so I just drew for a couple of years because all my paint was packed away. And drawing became my life in that time. Instagram went crazy, started YouTube, realized that for me, it was hitting that sweet spot of being a teacher as well as being an artist. And yeah, it's just, I can't do everything. I've really enjoyed exploring the drawing process. I'm self-taught. I don't use a book. I just think through what I'm doing, why am I doing it, what's working, what's not working. If it's not working, I try and change it in some way that I think will lead to the result I want. It's always about trying to visualize the result I want. And I haven't got to be able to, I'm not visualizing how I want them to be in 12 months' time, but I'm looking at what I've just done and thinking, how can I improve this? How can I make this better? If there's a couple of people watching who haven't hit the like button, it'd be nice to get over 30. Edgar saying, you are the reason I switched from pencil to fine liners. I'm having a lot more, I hope that says fun. I've got a red heart in front of it, so I can't see, but I presume it. Yeah, a lot more fun and getting a lot better. Absolutely. And I switched to from pencil to pen to take on my perfectionism head on. I was getting very frustrated with as I got better at drawing, I became more, it has to be right, has to be perfect. And so I was erasing more and more of my pencil under drawing. And I thought, this is not good. Didn't feel like a healthy mindset at all. And it was putting a lot of pressure on me when I drew. It was making me delay starting drawing because of the pressure. And I thought, no, that's crazy. You know, I don't want to do that. And we had a trip, almost 3 month trip to Europe planned for 2020. We had 2 weddings in Germany, 3 months apart, and thought we could just fly in and out to Germany, start and finish with a wedding, and travel around. And I was going to do lots of drawing and whatnot. And unfortunately, COVID stopped that. But hey there, lethal magician. Japan's doing very well in the Olympics, aren't they, at the moment? Good on you. Changed everything, and it didn't go. So hoping to go soon, early next year at the latest. Number 19. Problems of drawing architecture is windows that don't line up. It depends partly on the architecture we like to draw, but Edgar, sorry, from Rhode Island. I'm just having a flashback to Miss Congeniality and Miss Rhode Island. How does Rhode Island feel about Miss Congeniality? Is that a movie that's gone down well with Rhode Island, or not? It's not the sort of movie I normally would have watched. I just think it's a brilliant movie, though. I think I've seen it 3 times. I'm not sure I've seen any other movie 3 times, except Titanic, from the second half of Titanic, after the Titanic hits the iceberg. I've seen probably that 3 or 4 times, but I'm not sure I've watched a whole movie through as often as I have Miss Congeniality, and Miss Rhode Island is a big part of that. But windows that don't line up. So yeah, and it's on the horizontal, it's on the vertical. And it's not just when we're looking straight at a building, not just 1-point perspective, but at 2-point perspective where the rows of windows slide away. And so there is lining up the foreshortening, and there is lining up the angles that slide towards eye level, top and bottom. And it's, again, if we want to draw architecture, then we really need to have a way of making that work for us. It doesn't mean we have to draw them precisely. We can have a nice, loose, casual feel where there's a certain planned imprecision, if that makes sense. But we can't have them look careless and just random and not lining up. Oh, Edgar, you're making me feel like an old man. I must have been 40 when that movie came out. I don't know. Yeah, I had 4 kids who were old enough to watch it when it came out. Well, look, if you like comedies, it's worth a shot. Okay, point number 20 with weaknesses I see. These aren't in any order. This isn't the least important one, but it's careless hatch lines. Hatching is often a big problem for people. It's something I've really worked on in the last 12 months. And it's okay. So in fact, my youngest child is like 7 years older than you. Great. Okay, well, good on you, mate. You have a lot of happy drawing years ahead of you, I hope. But I've sort of one of the big problems I think with hatching is that it's almost always presented on little cubes and spheres and stuff, and the context is usually shade and maybe shadow, but usually shade. Shade is where part of an object, the light doesn't reach it because of the direction the light's coming from and the shape of the object. So the shade is on the part that the light can't reach. Shadow is what's cast by the object onto a different object. So we have shade on the cube, on the back of the cube or the sphere, and it casts a shadow on the ground. And it's worth knowing that shadow is darker than shade. It's also cooler in color than shade, which is significant if we're doing watercolor. But even in monochromatic, it's shadow is darker than shade. And hatching is always presented as something that's capturing the shade and the shadow. Hatching is so much more than shade and shadow. And some of my latest drawings of the Australian bush show some of the potential of hatching to actually create the scene. I often draw with my hatching lines now. I'm not using them to color in. I'm actually creating the effect I want through hatching. So hatching is hugely valuable. And when I'm asking myself, what direction do I do the hatch lines? That's the wrong question to ask. The question I need to ask is, what effect do I need to create here to capture this scene, this object? And then, well, what marks will do that? And that includes hatching. The biggest problem, though, I see is that there's just careless hatching with no regard for the underlying form. If we want to have a rule for hatching line direction, then I think the helpful way of thinking is hatch in a way that suggests the underlying form of the object that the hatching is on. So hatching is representing different things, but if it's shade and shadow, then there's an object that it's on. So my hatching lines should show that object, and flat two-dimensional crisscross hatching on rounded surfaces is deadly for any sense of 3 dimensions. And the other thing I often see is just scribble hatching. Look, scribble can be a very valid technique of line work, but it can also be a sign of carelessness. And if it is a sign of carelessness, then it will show that it's careless rather than being effective. Honestly, if I'm reduced to doing this because I've lost patience, I should just stop. When I stop, I've just stopped my drawing time. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't have to finish every drawing. It's a bad habit to be in to never finish, because we learn things in the second half that we don't learn in the first half. There are skills of thinking and whatnot we need in the second half that if I never get to the second half, I never develop. So, but for any given drawing, I don't need to finish it. It's not a problem, because if I've lost interest and patience, but I think I need to finish it, and I'm just scribbling now, I'm learning really bad habits. I'm learning bad habits about finishing a drawing. I'm learning bad habits about line work. I'm giving myself really unhelpful muscle memory about how I do this. And this will come back subconsciously in the future. We want to develop good habits in our drawing, helpful habits that will take our drawings where we want them to go. And we don't want to develop unhelpful habits. So a really good habit to develop is to stop when I'm now too tired or I don't have enough interest to take the level of care I need to take to do a good job. That's a good skill there to learn, when just to say, I need to stop. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. I'm tired, whether I finish this tomorrow or not. I don't want to start learning and reinforcing bad habits. Another helpful little tip, I think, for hatching is be aware that when we hatch, and so we should be hatching just individual lines, but we can do them fairly quickly. Is that there's a point where we start and a point where we finish. The point where we start is where we put the pen on the paper, so that we can line that up fairly accurately. But for most of us, hatching is fast enough that where the line finishes is not quite so precise. So choose, when we're hatching between two lines, choose the best side to start hatching on, the side where the sharper edge is going to visually be more effective. I think that's a very helpful kind of principle. And if I want them on both, if they both need to be fairly accurate, what I tend to do is I do half of them from left to right, and then I do half from right to left, and that kind of splits the difference. Let's have a look. Emily's saying from Indiana. So I have a lot of corn and cows to draw. Going to somewhere in Europe would be amazing to draw stuff. Yeah. But I mean, the best subjects though are the ones we can draw right now. And I was 50 before I went overseas, except for a quick trip to New Zealand once. No offense to my New Zealand friends, but that didn't really feel like going too far. But yeah, so yeah, there's lots of time to do that. Don't not draw till you can get to grand architecture. Start with whatever's around and enjoy that, and then you'll be further along when you do get to sit in front of the Musée du Louvre or whatever. What's Stefan saying? Here's a motif I had fun with. Stand really close to a wall with a lot of windows, then look up and a bit to the side and try to draw the pattern of windowsills. It gets almost abstract. Yeah, look, it would become, almost like an optical illusion art. Yeah. And that's one of the great things about architecture, because there can be lots of tight repetition on a very large scale. It is very geometric, which can be a challenge if we're drawing freehand. Teresa saying, I used your thoughts today in art class. Teacher made a comment. I said it is outlined. To correct, I dotted the line and hatched the area shape with paint and made the soft shape of the line. Great. Scott saying he likes the second half of the drawing best. Oh, I do too. As long as the first half has worked out. The first half is kind of the pressure half. The first half is you're setting up the framework for everything. If you've done that, and that can be very intense, if you've done that and you're kind of comfortable with that, then it should be much more enjoyable, which is all the more reason to finish our drawings, because I think the real fun does come in the second half when we've enjoyed what we've done. But we still need to not coast in the second half, because when we coast, we just do marks and marks and we don't stop, and we overwork our drawings, and we end up putting ink in all the white places that we've wanted to preserve it, and that's not helpful. So all of that. But the second half is always the fun. No, I haven't studied Heinrich Clay. I haven't studied anyone, Bobbin. Plus you said always lift hand between marks. Do you ever keep hand to paper? Look, yeah, it's not so much the hand on, it's the nib on the paper. It's the not scribbly. It's the not back and forth. It's the not zigzagging. That's the thing. It's making choices with each line is what I'm talking about. So, I've been using a pen and doing cross hatching and not using a pencil erasing, and it's really been helping. Yeah, that's great. Look, I've had a lot of people say that I've encouraged them to give a go at drawing with pen. And look, it can be really hard to do when you've lived with an eraser. But for me, it's really helped me get over my perfectionism, which I think had probably ground my drawing improvement to a halt. In fact, I think it was probably starting to work backwards, because I think perfectionism does that. It's never happy. It always wants a bit more. And if you improve, it becomes more demanding. And now you can see more than you could see before. And so now there's more you have to live up to in your drawing to make it look right. And you become, and maybe you start to draw harder things, but then you become more insecure because they are harder. And it just, I found that getting rid, if perfectionism is a problem for anyone, if it is, tell me in the notes, in the chat. For me, it certainly had become a problem the more I drew, in a way that it wasn't with the painting. I think because with oil paint, you can just paint over it. So it was a bit unexpected. And I found that, the eraser was the food for the perfectionism. It was the nourishment. It's what fed the perfectionism. The fact that, I'll fix it. No, I can change that. I can make that line more right, more perfect. When I said I'm not using an eraser at all, every mark I put's going to be there at the end, and that's okay. And I'll learn to work with that. And that's what I did. And suddenly there just wasn't the space for the perfectionism to be there. It was like starved of oxygen, and it just died. And it's the best thing that ever happened to my drawing. There's nothing wrong with using an eraser, of course. And if you draw with pencil, why not? Not that you have to use an eraser when you draw with pencil, but why not? Or do a pencil, whatever works for you is fine. But for me, the eraser was just feeding my perfectionism, and it was very unhelpful. And I feel wonderfully free now in a way that I couldn't have when I was still in that system. It's whatever works for me. It's whatever works for you when it comes to our drawing. Scott saying, yes, the first half feels like the pressure half very much. And Scott saying thought he needed to be a perfectionist, but it doesn't fit in with how he's able to draw, still trying to find a balance between detail and abstraction. Absolutely. We don't need to be aiming for realism, or not all the time. We can explore whatever we want to explore for whatever reason in our drawing. And, as a teacher, my aim isn't that your drawings look like my drawings. I don't have any problem if they do, but a good teacher will lead their students into developing their own drawing skills and style and confidence and understanding in their direction. That comes from their creative thinking, their imaginations of possibilities, their interests. the things visually that excite them. A good teacher will help them go far with that, perhaps faster and further than they might have managed on their own. As I said, I don't mind if you draw the way I do. And I'm delighted if you draw better than I do, because a good teacher will always have their students go further than they've gone, because in a sense, the students stand on their shoulders. The students get to start with, if my videos make sense to you and you watch them and you benefit from them, then you are starting at a place that took me 2.5 years of 1,000 drawing videos and intense thinking and drawing to get to. And I mean, it doesn't mean that you start at the same place, but you start with that understanding, possibly, or some measure of it anyway. But now you get to run with that in whatever way your drawings look. Emily saying, yes, the perfectionism is hard to get rid of. My perspective is going off and my drawings were looking flat and I always wanted to erase them. So it was just yes, the tearing the paper. That's you have a problem when the paper starts to tear, don't you? Right. Okay, look, that's 2 hours. Gosh, that's certainly long enough. So look, I hope these thoughts have been helpful. If you came in and missed a lot of it, then you can go back to the start in a moment when I end this and pop it on while you clean the house or do some gardening or whatever. Just sit in front of a fire. If no, I guess if it's nighttime for you in the Northern Hemisphere, so you probably don't want a fire now. But whatever. Hope it's been helpful. Please hit the like button if you haven't. Are there any final questions you want to ask me while thank you, Stefan, while you've got the chance? Final question, you're desperate, why you've still got me? If you haven't watched yesterday's video, number one reason why our drawings aren't improving, please let me recommend you watch it, because it puts in a more ordered form some of my ramblings from now. Let's see. Oh, look, actually, I won't be having a live session next week, Edgar. I've just got a few things on that aren't related to drawing at all that will knock me out of action in terms of YouTube for a few days. So sorry about that. Yeah. But if you haven't looked at my previous live sessions, well, you can just go back to the live section on my homepage and have a scroll down and see what the themes have been, and listen to some of those if you'd like. Okay, everyone, thanks for joining. Hope some of you at least are going to go and do some drawing. Hope some of you might go back and look at yesterday's video. Number one reason why your drawings aren't improving. I think it's a very helpful one. But look, whatever you watch, whatever you do, however you spend your day, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.